In December 1941, the world watched in shock as the Japanese Empire launched a devastating attack on Pearl Harbor, thrusting the United States into a global conflict that would reshape the course of history. In the months that followed, Japan moved with astonishing speed, capturing vast swaths of territory across Southeast Asia and the Pacific. From the bustling streets of Hong Kong to the jungles of Malaya, from the strategic islands of the Philippines to the distant Solomon Islands, Japanese forces seemed unstoppable, their expansion relentless and methodical. Every conquest tightened their grip on the Pacific, posing an unprecedented threat to Allied supply lines and the safety of nations far from the front lines. Amid this rapid expansion, one small island in the Solomon chain began to stand out not for its size or population, but for its strategic importance. Guadalcanal, a dense, tropical island with untamed jungles and rugged terrain, became the focal point of a growing Allied concern. Intelligence reports revealed that the Japanese were constructing an airfield along its northern coast, a development that could allow them to dominate the skies and disrupt critical supply routes connecting the United States with Australia and New Zealand. The implications were clear. If Guadalcanal fell completely under Japanese control, the balance of power in the Pacific could tilt dangerously in favor of the empire. For the Allies, the threat was both urgent and daunting. The United States, still reeling from the shock of Pearl Harbor, faced the challenge of mounting an offensive far from home waters, in a theater of war that was largely unfamiliar. Maps were incomplete, reconnaissance was limited, and the terrain promised to test even the most experienced soldiers. Yet, in the face of uncertainty, a bold plan began to take shape, a plan that would not merely strike at Japanese positions, but aim to seize the initiative and turn the tide of the Pacific War. This was the beginning of Operation Watchtower, the first major Allied offensive against Japan. The goal was ambitious. American Marines would land on Guadalcanal, confront the entrenched Japanese forces, and secure the airfield, thereby establishing a foothold for further operations in the Pacific. The stakes could not have been higher. Success meant safeguarding vital supply lines, demonstrating Allied resolve, and sending a powerful message that Japanese expansion could be challenged. Failure, on the other hand, could leave the region vulnerable and embolden the empire to extend its reach even further. As we explore the story of Guadalcanal, we will follow the journey of the Marines, their courage in the face of adversity, and the challenges of fighting in dense jungles and against a determined enemy. This is a tale of strategy, endurance, and heroism, set against the backdrop of one of the most pivotal moments in World War II. If you enjoy learning about these incredible stories from history, do not forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of our future explorations into the battles that shaped the world. Join us as we uncover the courage and determination that defined the first major Allied offensive in the Pacific, the Battle of Guadalcanal. As the Japanese forces tightened their grip across the Pacific, their eyes turned toward a small, seemingly unremarkable island that would soon become a pivotal point in the struggle for control of the region. Guadalcanal, a remote patch of dense jungle and rugged coastline in the Solomon Islands, had long existed quietly, its tropical forests and hidden coves largely untouched by the ambitions of empires. Yet, in mid-1942, it became clear to Allied intelligence that this island, overlooked by many for its isolation and modest size, held a significance that could alter the course of the Pacific War. Reports filtered back to Washington that the Japanese were constructing an airfield along its northern coast, a development that sent shockwaves through the Allied command. This airfield, once operational, would allow Japan to project air power across a vast swath of the South Pacific, threatening the lifelines connecting Hawaii to Australia and New Zealand, crucial arteries for the movement of troops, supplies, and equipment. The stakes were immense, for control of these lines meant the difference between sustaining the fight in the Pacific or watching the effort crumble under the pressure of enemy dominance. The news of the airfield's construction transformed what had been a distant theater of war into an urgent focal point of Allied strategy. Military planners recognized that allowing Japan to complete the airfield unchecked would grant the empire the ability to launch air raids on the shipping lanes that carried vital reinforcements and materials across thousands of miles of ocean. The thought of enemy aircraft patrolling over the Pacific, ready to intercept convoys or strike bases, forced the Allied leadership to confront a daunting reality. Inaction was not an option. Each felled coconut tree, each cleared patch of jungle, represented more than just a construction project. It was a ticking clock counting down to a strategic nightmare that could jeopardize operations throughout the South Pacific. The urgency of the situation demanded a response that went far beyond reconnaissance or small-scale raids. It called for a bold, decisive action that could strike at the heart of Japanese ambitions before their plans came to fruition. In response, the United States began to plan what would become Operation Watchtower, a daring endeavor aimed not simply at contesting Japanese control, but at seizing the initiative entirely. The operation called for a full-scale amphibious assault by the Marines, who were tasked with landing on Guadalcanal, neutralizing the Japanese presence, and securing the airfield for Allied use. The challenges were monumental. Guadalcanal was largely unmapped, with thick, uncharted jungles and treacherous terrain that would test the endurance and ingenuity of every soldier. Intelligence was limited, reconnaissance flights had only scratched the surface, and the logistics of moving men, equipment, and supplies across thousands of miles of ocean presented obstacles that few commanders had ever faced. Yet the strategic imperative was clear: by capturing the island and taking control of the airfield, the Allies would not only deny Japan a critical foothold but also establish a base from which they could project their own air power, protecting the crucial supply routes that threaded through the vast Pacific expanse. The decision to act was not made lightly, and the weight of the responsibility fell on a generation of officers and enlisted men who would face challenges that few could fully anticipate. Major General Alexander Vandergrift, newly appointed to lead the 1st Marine Division, found himself at the center of this audacious operation. Despite limited preparation time, outbreaks of disease among his troops, and the unpredictable conditions of jungle warfare, Vandergrift and his command embraced the mission with determination. Understanding that the success of the Pacific campaign hinged on their ability to secure Guadalcanal, the Marines trained as best they could under the circumstances, conducting rehearsals in New Zealand and learning to coordinate complex maneuvers with naval and air support, all the while knowing that once they landed, there would be no turning back. When the assault finally began on August 7, 1942, the Marines faced immediate challenges, not least the rugged coastline and the relentless, humid jungle that seemed to swallow every sound and movement. The Japanese, though initially caught by surprise, quickly mounted fierce resistance, and the struggle to control key points on the island, particularly the airfield, became a grueling test of endurance, skill, and courage. The Marines' ability to adapt to the terrain, make use of their limited resources, and maintain cohesion under fire proved critical. The capture of the airfield, later named Henderson Field in honor of a fallen hero from the Battle of Midway, transformed the strategic landscape. From this base, Allied aircraft could defend supply convoys, strike at Japanese positions, and provide much-needed support to ground troops as they pushed deeper into the jungle. Facing ambushes, artillery fire, and the constant threat of disease that claimed as many casualties as combat itself. Throughout the campaign, the construction of the Japanese airfield, which had initially sparked such concern, remained a powerful reminder of the strategic stakes. Its presence dictated every movement, every plan, and every risk the Allied commanders took. Denying its use to the enemy became not only a military objective, but a symbol of the larger struggle for control in the Pacific. The success of the operation was not immediate, and the fighting continued for months, punctuated by naval engagements, aerial dogfights, and intense ground combat that tested the limits of human endurance. Yet by maintaining pressure, coordinating land, sea, and air forces, and leveraging every advantage the island's terrain could offer, the Marines ultimately succeeded in turning Guadalcanal into a fortified base for future operations and securing the lifelines that connected the far reaches of the Allied world. The story of Guadalcanal and the threat posed by the Japanese airfield underscores the delicate interplay of geography, strategy, and human determination in warfare. What might have seemed like a remote island of little consequence became a linchpin of the Pacific campaign, a place where planning, courage, and sheer will determined the fate of thousands and shaped the course of the war. As we reflect on these events, it becomes clear that the control of a single airfield was never just about land or planes. It was about the power to protect essential supply lines, to project strength across oceans, and to assert that even in the vast expanse of the Pacific, decisive action could change the balance of power. As reports of Japanese construction on Guadalcanal reached Allied command, it became increasingly clear that inaction was not an option. The airfield under construction posed a direct threat to critical supply lines connecting the United States with Australia and New Zealand, and the very momentum of the Pacific campaign hung in the balance. The challenge facing the Allies was monumental. They needed to act decisively against a determined and capable enemy, but the island itself was largely uncharted. Its dense jungles, rugged hills, and narrow coastal beaches presenting obstacles that few military planners had ever faced. Yet within this daunting scenario, a plan began to take shape: ambitious, risky, and unprecedented in scale. The United States would launch an amphibious assault to capture Guadalcanal, remove the Japanese forces entrenched there, and establish an Allied airbase that would serve as a linchpin for future operations in the Pacific. The planning of such an operation was fraught with uncertainty. Maps of the island were incomplete and often inaccurate. Reconnaissance flights provided only partial views of the terrain, and the tropical climate promised heat, humidity, and disease that could sap even the strongest soldiers of their strength and morale. Despite these limitations, the Allied leadership understood that the stakes demanded bold action. The capture of Guadalcanal was not simply a tactical goal but a strategic imperative. For without control of the island and its airfield, Japanese forces would maintain the ability to project power across the South Pacific, jeopardizing not only supply convoys but also the broader Allied position in the theater. The concept of an amphibious assault landing troops directly from the sea onto enemy-held territory was inherently complex and dangerous, involving the coordination of naval vessels, transport ships, landing craft, aircraft, and ground forces in a hostile environment where missteps could easily lead to disaster. Major General Alexander Vandergrift, a seasoned Marine officer, was tasked with leading the 1st Marine Division in this unprecedented campaign. Vandergrift had a reputation for rigorous training and a practical understanding of jungle warfare, honed during earlier deployments in challenging environments. Yet even he was aware of the difficulties that lay ahead. The division faced a compressed preparations schedule, arriving in the South Pacific with minimal time for rehearsals or acclimatization, and contending with logistical challenges including limited supplies, outbreaks of disease, and the coordination of complex naval and air support. Every detail mattered, from the timing of the landings to the allocation of artillery and the positioning of reconnaissance units. The success of the operation depended on precise execution and the ability to adapt quickly to unexpected developments. As the date of the assault approached, the U.S. Navy moved into position to provide the critical backbone of support for the Marines. Aircraft carriers, including the Saratoga, Enterprise, and Wasp, took up stations to offer fighter cover, while battleships, cruisers, and destroyers prepared to bombard Japanese positions and protect the transport fleet. The combination of naval firepower, air support, and ground forces represented the cutting edge of Allied military capability. Yet even with these resources, uncertainty loomed large. The Japanese forces on Guadalcanal were experienced, well-armed, and determined to defend the island, and the surrounding waters were patrolled by additional enemy fleets, ready to challenge any attempt to establish a foothold. Every element of the operation, from the movement of landing craft to the timing of air strikes, was a calculated gamble, a test of skill, coordination, and courage on a scale rarely seen in the Pacific theater up to that point. On August 7, 1942, the operation commenced. The first waves of Marines approached the beaches under the cover of naval artillery and air reconnaissance, navigating unfamiliar shores and treacherous surf. As they landed, they encountered Japanese defenders, some caught by surprise and others ready to contest every inch of territory. The initial encounters were tense and chaotic, a mixture of firefights, artillery exchanges, and the struggle to secure key positions. The primary objective was clear. The airfield, later named Henderson Field in honor of a fallen hero of Midway, had to be captured and held. Control of this asset would allow Allied aircraft to operate from the island, providing air cover for supply convoys, supporting ground operations, and countering Japanese air attacks. The Marines' success in securing the airfield marked a turning point in the campaign, transforming Guadalcanal from a remote island under threat into a strategically valuable base of operations. The battle, however, was far from over. Japanese forces quickly regrouped and began to organize counterattacks, sending reinforcements by sea and mounting assaults against the Allied perimeter. The Marines were forced to fight not only the enemy but also the environment itself. Dense jungle, torrential rains, tropical diseases, and difficult terrain all conspired to slow movements, obscure visibility, and challenge communication. Every decision by the commanders carried weight, as missteps could lead to isolation, supply shortages, or heavy casualties. Yet the determination of the Marines, combined with the strategic advantage provided by control of the airfield and the support of naval and air units, allowed them to hold key positions and repel successive Japanese attacks. The story of the amphibious assault on Guadalcanal illustrates the interplay between strategy, logistics, and human resilience. Capturing the island was not merely a military maneuver. It was a statement of intent, a demonstration that the Allies could take the initiative in the Pacific, challenge Japanese expansion, and protect the vital supply lines connecting continents. The operation required meticulous planning, coordination across multiple branches of the military, and the unwavering resolve of soldiers and sailors facing a determined enemy in one of the harshest combat environments imaginable. The establishment of Henderson Field allowed Allied aircraft to dominate the skies above Guadalcanal, secure supply routes, and create a foundation for subsequent operations that would carry the momentum of the Pacific campaign forward. Through this daring operation, the U.S. demonstrated that even in the face of uncertainty, bold and decisive action could yield significant results. The amphibious assault on Guadalcanal became a model for future campaigns, highlighting the importance of joint operations, adaptability in challenging terrain, and the courage required to seize opportunities when they arise. It was a story of strategic foresight meeting the determination of individuals, of coordination across seas and skies, and of the ability of a well-planned offensive to change the course of a conflict in ways that would resonate far beyond the immediate battlefield. As the United States prepared for its first major offensive in the Pacific, the Marines assigned to Guadalcanal faced an array of obstacles that tested their resilience even before they set foot on the island. The challenges began with the most fundamental aspect of military planning: knowledge of the terrain. Maps were scarce, often outdated, and riddled with inaccuracies that left commanders uncertain of what they would encounter once the landing craft approached the beaches. Reconnaissance flights provided glimpses of the island's coastlines and the partially constructed Japanese airfield. Yet these missions could only reveal so much, and thick jungle canopy obscured much of the interior, making it impossible to assess enemy positions. Natural obstacles, or potential landing sites with confidence. Commanders were forced to make critical decisions based on partial information, relying as much on intuition and prior experience as on the limited intelligence available. Logistics presented another formidable complication. Transport ships had to carry not only troops but also artillery, vehicles, ammunition, and provisions across thousands of miles of open ocean. The planning was further complicated by labor strikes at key ports, delaying the loading and departure of essential equipment. Even when the fleet departed, adverse weather and unpredictable sea conditions threatened to scatter convoys and complicate rendezvous points. Meanwhile, the soldiers themselves were not immune to the strains of preparation. Influenza outbreaks swept through the ranks during training in New Zealand, weakening the men and forcing medical teams to scramble to contain the spread while maintaining operational readiness. The combination of disease, exhaustion, and logistical uncertainty created a tense environment in which every decision carried heightened risk. Yet the timetable for the operation could not be delayed. The Japanese airfield on Guadalcanal was nearing completion, and the strategic imperative to act was clear. Training and rehearsals were equally challenged. The Marines attempted to simulate the conditions they would face on Guadalcanal, but exercises often fell short of replicating the harsh realities of jungle combat and amphibious landings under fire. Equipment meant to be tested in these rehearsals sometimes malfunctioned, from unreliable landing craft engines to misfiring artillery pieces. Forcing soldiers to adapt quickly and innovate on the spot, commanders encouraged improvisation. But improvisation under such conditions required skill and courage, as errors could lead to injury, loss of supplies, or compromised operations once the actual assault began. Despite these setbacks, the Marines drilled relentlessly, determined to make the most of the limited preparation time, understanding that success would depend as much on their adaptability and discipline as on the adequacy of planning. The tight schedules imposed additional pressures. From the moment the decision was made to launch Operation Watchtower, there was little room for delay. The island's strategic importance meant that every day of hesitation allowed the Japanese to fortify positions, expand their defenses, and complete the airfield that threatened Allied supply lines. Commanders balanced the urgency of action with the need to ensure their men were equipped, briefed, and prepared for the unknown. Time constraints forced commanders to prioritize certain elements of training and leave others to be learned in the crucible of combat. A calculated risk that weighed heavily on both leaders and troops. Each assignment of men, each allocation of artillery, and each landing plan had to be executed with precision, even as gaps in information and unpredictable events constantly challenged the assumptions on which these plans were based. Disease and environmental conditions added a relentless layer of difficulty that tested morale and physical endurance. Tropical illnesses such as dysentery, malaria, and fungal infections spread easily in the humid, rain-soaked jungles of the South Pacific, and medical support was limited both during training and once troops began arriving on the island. Soldiers contended with heat, humidity, and monsoon rains that turned paths into mudslides and obscured visibility. slowing movement and complicating supply efforts. Every footstep through the dense vegetation carried risk not only from enemy contact but also from exhaustion, dehydration, and illness. Commanders had to account for attrition not only from combat but from the environment itself, a reality that demanded careful planning, flexible leadership, and constant vigilance. Amid these challenges, the Marines' sense of purpose remained unshaken. Leadership emphasized the importance of adaptability, fostering a culture in which soldiers were trained to respond to unexpected obstacles with resourcefulness and initiative. Small units practiced rapid decision-making under stress, learning to navigate the jungle, establish defensive positions, and coordinate firepower with limited guidance. Officers encouraged reconnaissance and improvisation, teaching men to read the terrain, anticipate enemy movements, and leverage the environment to their advantage, even as the threat of disease, unreliable equipment, and incomplete intelligence loomed over every operation. These exercises cultivated the resilience and discipline that would be essential when the first waves of the assault finally hit the beaches of Guadalcanal. The convergence of these complications limited maps. Partial reconnaissance, labor disruptions, disease outbreaks, and compressed schedules created a scenario in which preparation and execution were inseparably linked. Every challenge demanded creative solutions, and every solution tested the courage, endurance, and ingenuity of the Marines. While these obstacles might have demoralized less determined forces, for the men preparing to land on Guadalcanal, they became part of the narrative of resolve and adaptability that would define the campaign. The hardships faced in the lead-up to the operation were a prelude to the grueling combat to come, and the ability to endure these trials was as crucial to the eventual success as the planning of the assault itself. The story of these preparations highlights not only the complexity of modern amphibious operations, but also the human capacity to adapt, persevere, and overcome in the face of overwhelming uncertainty, setting the stage for a historic confrontation that would test the limits of courage and leadership in the Pacific theater. As dawn broke over the Solomon Islands on August 7, 1942, the first waves of American Marines approached the shores of Guadalcanal, their landing craft cutting through the glassy waters of the Red Beach and Tulagi areas, each vessel laden with soldiers, weapons, and essential supplies for the coming battle. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, tension, and the unspoken understanding that every man aboard these craft would soon face the harsh reality of combat in an environment few had ever encountered. The Japanese forces stationed on the island were not oblivious to the approaching threat. Patrols and sentries had observed unusual activity at sea, and though the main airfield was still under construction, the defenders were prepared to contest any attempt to land. For the Marines, every minute of approach was an exercise in focus and discipline. As the distance between the ships and the shore felt both tantalizingly close and impossibly daunting, each footfall potentially the first step into a deadly confrontation. The landing itself was a complex maneuver, requiring precise coordination between naval bombardments, air reconnaissance, and the timing of infantry waves hitting the beaches. As the Marines disembarked from the landing craft, they were met with sporadic fire from Japanese machine guns and snipers hidden amidst the dense vegetation and scattered fortifications. The initial resistance was intense but disorganized, reflecting both the small number of Japanese defenders and the element of surprise that the Marines brought to the assault. Soldiers moved with a careful balance of aggression and caution, using the natural cover offered by rocks, trees, and the undulating terrain to advance toward their objectives while minimizing casualties. Every Marine knew the stakes. Securing the beachhead was only the first step in a campaign that could determine control of the entire region. Despite the difficulties, American forces pressed forward with determination, drawing upon rigorous training and improvisation honed during their preparation in New Zealand and Fiji. The landing craft, often arriving in waves, allowed for a continuous stream of reinforcements, equipment, and supplies to reach the shore, sustaining the momentum of the assault. Naval artillery from supporting warships provided suppressive fire against known or suspected Japanese positions, softening defenses and buying precious seconds for the advancing infantry. Air cover from carrier-based aircraft helped to neutralize potential aerial threats, though the skies remained perilous, with the ever-present possibility of sudden attacks from Japanese planes based on nearby islands or reconnaissance patrols. The coordination between sea, air, and land forces demonstrated the evolving doctrine of amphibious warfare, highlighting both the ingenuity and the immense risk inherent in mounting such a complex operation. As the day progressed, the Marines moved inland, navigating the thick jungle undergrowth, swamps, and ridges that characterized Guadalcanal's unforgiving landscape. The construction of the Japanese airfield had been meticulous and rapid, with clearings made among towering coconut trees and dense underbrush. But the incomplete state of the installation meant that it was vulnerable to a swift and determined assault. American forces recognized the airfield as the crucial prize. Its capture would not only deny the Japanese a strategic asset, but also provide the Allies with a foothold from which to project air power across the Solomon Islands, protecting vital supply routes and supporting future operations. The Marines pushed forward with a combination of small unit tactics, suppressive fire, and coordinated artillery support, encountering pockets of resistance that were met with both courage and calculated force, gradually overwhelming the defenders through persistence and superior organization. By the end of the first day, the Marines had secured a significant portion of the northern coast, and the Japanese presence on the beaches had been largely neutralized. Attention turned to the airfield itself, which, though incomplete, had already become the focal point of the unfolding campaign. Engineers and infantry units worked side by side to assess and secure the site, removing potential threats, establishing defensive positions, and preparing for the inevitable counterattacks that would come once the Japanese realized the loss of their strategic position. The successful capture of the airfield was immediately recognized as a milestone, a testament to the coordination, planning, and tenacity of the Marines who had landed under difficult conditions and faced both environmental and enemy challenges without faltering. In the days that followed, the airfield was expanded and fortified, eventually taking the name Henderson Field, honoring Major Lofton Henderson, a Marine aviator killed at the Battle of Midway. The airfield quickly became operational, allowing American aircraft to launch sorties that provided critical air cover for the island, harassed Japanese positions, and safeguarded supply lines connecting Guadalcanal with Australia, New Zealand, and the broader Allied forces in the Pacific. The ability to hold and operate from Henderson Field transformed the campaign from a risky amphibious landing into a sustained offensive capability, giving the Marines a strategic advantage that would be pivotal in the coming months. The airfield became both a symbol and a practical instrument of the Allied presence, demonstrating that even in the remote and challenging environment of the South Pacific, determination, planning, and coordinated action could yield tangible and decisive results. The story of the landings at Red Beach and Tulagi underscores the interplay between preparation, courage, and adaptability. From the moment the Marines first sighted the shore to the establishment of Henderson Field, every action was shaped by a combination of strategic foresight and the ability to respond to unforeseen challenges. The initial Japanese resistance, though limited, forced the Americans to maintain focus and employ ingenuity, reinforcing lessons learned during months of preparation under adverse conditions. This episode also illustrated the significance of rapid decision-making and coordinated efforts across multiple military branches, as naval support, air cover, and ground operations all converged to ensure the success of the landing. For those who study the Pacific Campaign, the capture of Guadalcanal's airfield remains a defining moment, highlighting not only the tactical and strategic brilliance involved, but also the resilience and courage of the Marines who forged a foothold in a hostile and uncharted theater, laying the foundation for future victories that would shape the course of the war. In the weeks following the initial American landings on Guadalcanal, the island transformed from a contested beachhead into a tense battleground, with the newly captured Henderson Field serving as both a symbol of Allied resolve and a magnet for Japanese counteroffensives. The Japanese High Command, unwilling to relinquish the strategically critical position, launched a series of determined efforts to retake the island, combining the raw courage of infantry assaults with the ingenuity of nighttime naval resupply missions that would later be immortalized as the Tokyo Express. These operations were designed to exploit the cover of darkness and the agility of fast-moving destroyers and cruisers to deliver reinforcements and supplies directly to Japanese troops struggling to sustain their positions against the increasingly formidable American presence. The stakes were immense. If the Japanese could reclaim Guadalcanal or disrupt Allied control of Henderson Field, they could once again threaten the supply lines connecting the United States, Australia, and New Zealand, potentially altering the balance of power in the Pacific theater. The terrain of Guadalcanal played an outsized role in shaping the intensity and unpredictability of the fighting. Dense jungle, swampy lowlands, and steep ridges created natural choke points that made movement perilous and combat exhausting, favoring neither side unequivocally but rewarding adaptability and intimate knowledge of the environment. Japanese forces, led by commanders determined to restore their country's foothold, undertook arduous marches through the thick undergrowth, carrying weapons, artillery, and supplies over grueling distances, often under the oppressive heat and humidity of the tropical climate. These soldiers had trained extensively in jungle warfare, yet the conditions tested their endurance and discipline to the utmost. Each step toward the American perimeter was a calculated risk, a balancing act between speed and stealth, with every movement potentially exposing troops to devastating fire from well-entrenched Marines armed with superior artillery and increasingly experienced in close-quarters combat. One of the earliest and most notorious engagements of this phase was the Battle of the Tenaru, where Japanese infantry, led by Colonel Keanu Ichiki, launched a bold frontal assault against a carefully prepared American defensive line. The Japanese approach under the cover of darkness was executed with remarkable discipline, a testament to both their training and their determination to reclaim the island. Yet the Americans, having learned from prior encounters and with the advantage of intelligence and well-positioned fortifications, were able to anticipate the assault, bringing to bear concentrated artillery, machine gun, and rifle fire that turned the attacking force into a scene of catastrophic losses. Ichiki's men, driven by courage and a rigid code of honor, faced the withering fire with relentless determination, only to be decimated in an engagement that left hundreds dead and marked a sobering demonstration of the ferocity and cost of the campaign. The Battle of the Tenaru revealed not only the Japanese willingness to commit fully to seemingly suicidal attacks, but also the increasing effectiveness of the Marines in jungle warfare, a combination of resilience, preparation, and tactical ingenuity that would define the remainder of the Guadalcanal campaign. Simultaneously, the Tokyo Express missions underscored the ingenuity and adaptability of Japanese naval operations. These high-speed resupply runs, executed primarily under the cover of night, enabled the Japanese to circumvent Allied air superiority and deliver troops, weapons, and provisions directly to embattled positions along the island's coast. The destroyers and cruisers involved in these missions navigated treacherous waters and narrow channels with precision, often under threat of interception from American warships and carrier-based aircraft. Each successful run bolstered the Japanese defenders, allowing them to regroup, reinforce positions, and prepare for subsequent offensives. The logistical acumen demonstrated in these missions was remarkable, reflecting an understanding that, in the dense and hostile environment of the Solomon Islands, survival often depended as much on the ability to sustain forces under fire as on direct battlefield engagements. As the campaign unfolded, a pattern of attrition emerged. Japanese forces, despite their skill and dedication, faced mounting difficulties in maintaining supply lines, coordinating attacks, and replacing casualties, while the Americans leveraged Henderson Field to establish air superiority, enabling rapid response to both land and naval threats. The interplay between persistent Japanese assaults and the evolving tactical capabilities of the Marines created a dynamic, almost chess-like environment, where each side attempted to anticipate and counter the moves of the other. Nighttime raids and aggressive maneuvers by Japanese troops were increasingly met with coordinated counterattacks. Artillery barrages and aerial sorties, forcing the attackers into grueling, high-risk engagements that tested every aspect of military discipline and endurance. The human element of this struggle cannot be overstated. Japanese soldiers faced the psychological toll of relentless combat, limited supplies, and the knowledge that failure could carry not only personal consequences, but strategic ramifications for the empire as a whole. Marines, many of whom had never experienced jungle warfare before, adapted quickly under the leadership of commanders who emphasized initiative, flexibility, and cohesion. The courage displayed on both sides was amplified by the stakes. Control of Guadalcanal meant more than a single island. It represented a gateway to strategic dominance in the Pacific, the security of supply lines, and the momentum of a broader campaign against an enemy still capable of great military feats. By the end of these initial clashes, it became evident that Guadalcanal was shaping into a prolonged and costly struggle, one in which neither side could afford complacency. The Japanese, undeterred by setbacks such as the catastrophic losses at the Tenaru, continued to innovate with resupply tactics and adaptive combat strategies, while the Americans solidified their positions, expanded Henderson Field, and refined defensive and offensive operations. Each engagement, each maneuver, and each act of individual bravery contributed to a larger narrative of endurance, strategy, and the relentless push and pull for control of this critical island. The battles during this phase exemplified the complex interplay of logistics, terrain, and human determination, highlighting that victory in the Pacific would not be achieved solely through numbers or firepower, but through the relentless will to endure, adapt, and seize opportunities under the most challenging of circumstances. The story of the Japanese attempts to retake Guadalcanal, through both determined infantry assaults and the innovative Tokyo Express naval missions, illustrates the intensity and complexity of warfare in the Pacific, where success required not only courage and combat skill but also strategic foresight, adaptability, and an unyielding commitment to objectives that extended far beyond the immediate battlefield, setting the stage for the protracted and historic struggle that would define the Guadalcanal campaign. The struggle for Guadalcanal evolved into a grueling and multifaceted contest in which every element of modern warfare converged amid the island's dense jungles and treacherous waters, creating an environment as punishing as it was unpredictable. After the Marines secured Henderson Field and repelled the first Japanese attempts to reclaim it, The conflict settled into a drawn-out campaign, defined not by swift victories but by the relentless interplay of land, sea, and air operations, each shaping the course of the fight and testing the endurance of those who fought. The jungle itself became both battlefield and adversary, its tangled vegetation concealing movement and distorting sound, its oppressive humidity sapping strength and complicating even the simplest maneuvers. Every patrol, every advance through the undergrowth required constant vigilance. Enemy soldiers could emerge without warning, and the dense foliage reduced visibility to a few yards, turning every encounter into a sudden, intimate clash where quick reflexes and steady nerves meant the difference between life and death. Artillery exchanges punctuated the eerie stillness of the rainforest, the thunderous roar of shells echoing through the canopy and shaking the ground with each detonation. Both sides sought to gain the upper hand through the calculated use of heavy guns, and these barrages often preceded or followed infantry movements, providing cover or attempting to break entrenched positions. Yet the jungle's density absorbed and distorted the sound of approaching shells, giving little warning and magnifying the terror of each bombardment. For soldiers huddled in foxholes or crouched behind hastily built fortifications, the earth-shaking blasts were a constant reminder of the immense destructive power both armies could unleash, a brutal counterpoint to the otherwise quiet menace of the forest. Beyond the island's shores, the waters of the Solomon Sea became the stage for some of the most intense naval engagements of the Pacific War. The narrow straits and island-studded channels forced fleets into close-quarters confrontations where the outcome hinged on quick maneuvering, accurate gunnery, and the courage of crews facing sudden flashes of enemy fire. American and Japanese warships clashed in night battles illuminated only by the brief flares of gunfire and the orange glow of burning vessels, their silhouettes barely visible in the darkness. These encounters, often fought at point-blank range, tested the skill of sailors and the nerve of commanders who had to make split-second decisions in the chaos of battle. Each naval engagement threatened the delicate supply lines sustaining the troops ashore, for without steady reinforcement and ammunition, the forces on Guadalcanal could not hold their precarious positions. Overhead, the skies were rarely quiet. Aerial dogfights became a daily spectacle as American pilots from Henderson Field squared off against experienced Japanese aviators in fast, deadly duels that spiraled through clouds and across the blazing tropical sun. The roar of engines and the rattle of machine guns filled the air as fighters darted and weaved, each seeking the decisive shot while avoiding the enemy's deadly aim. These clashes determined more than just immediate survival. Control of the skies dictated whether supply convoys could reach the island, whether ground troops would be bombed or protected, and whether naval forces could operate with confidence in the surrounding waters. The pilots' courage and skill transformed the air war into a contest of endurance and ingenuity, where victories were hard-won and losses keenly felt. Yet perhaps the most unrelenting challenge for both sides was the struggle to maintain the flow of supplies and reinforcements essential to sustaining the fight. Every shell fired, every gallon of fuel consumed, every meal eaten had to be brought across vast distances of open ocean, a logistical feat complicated by enemy action, unpredictable weather, and the sheer remoteness of the island. American forces relied on a fragile network of convoys and support ships, while the Japanese countered with their high-speed Tokyo Express runs, gambling on speed and stealth to evade Allied air patrols and deliver men and material under the cover of darkness. The contest to control these lifelines was as decisive as any firefight, for without supplies even the most determined soldiers would falter. Malaria, dysentery, and tropical fevers stalked both camps, thinning ranks and draining strength, reminding all involved that nature could be as formidable an enemy as any human opponent. For the men on the ground, the daily reality was a constant blending of these different dimensions of warfare. Marines and Japanese infantry alike endured sleepless nights listening to the distant rumble of naval guns or the sudden drone of aircraft engines, never knowing when the next attack would come or from which direction. Patrols through the jungle were punctuated by sudden skirmishes, while the occasional lull only deepened the sense of tension, as if the island itself held its breath before the next explosion of violence. Each day demanded improvisation and resilience, repairing equipment battered by rain and mud, fortifying positions weakened by bombardment, tending to the sick and wounded even as the possibility of another assault loomed. The campaign's complexity revealed how modern war could no longer be confined to a single domain. Success on Guadalcanal required mastery of land operations, naval strategy, and air combat, each dependent on the others in a delicate balance that shifted with every battle. A breakthrough at sea could cut off supplies and doom ground forces. A victory in the air could protect convoys and give artillery the breathing room it needed to support the infantry. A well-executed assault on the jungle's hidden trails could blunt the enemy's next offensive before it began. Commanders on both sides had to think across these domains, coordinating actions in a theater where every decision reverberated across land, sea, and sky. As the months dragged on, it became clear that Guadalcanal was more than a single campaign. It was a crucible in which new strategies of combined warfare were forged and tested under the most demanding conditions. The intense jungle fighting, the pounding artillery duels, the nocturnal naval clashes, the swirling aerial battles, and the constant logistical challenges combined to create a drama of endurance and ingenuity, where the capacity to adapt was as important as the courage to fight. The island's muddy trails and blood-soaked beaches bore witness to a struggle that was as much about the evolution of warfare as it was about territorial control. A struggle that would leave an indelible mark on the men who fought there and on the larger course of the Pacific War itself. The Battle of Guadalcanal was as much a contest of innovation and technological adaptation as it was a test of human endurance and courage, with both sides deploying an array of weapons, vehicles, and aircraft that defined the tempo and nature of the conflict across land, sea, and air. For the American forces, the effectiveness of their combined arms approach became immediately apparent. As aircraft, tanks, landing craft, and infantry weapons worked in concert to project power into an environment as unforgiving as it was strategically vital. From the skies, the Grumman F-4F Wildcat fighters and Douglas Speed Dauntless dive bombers proved indispensable, their presence not only challenging Japanese air superiority but also providing critical cover for transport convoys and amphibious operations. The Wildcats, maneuverable and resilient, engaged Japanese Zeros in dogfights that tested both pilot skill and machine limits, while the Dauntless dive bombers delivered precise ordnance against ships and fortified positions, demonstrating the growing importance of carrier-based aviation in shaping the outcome of naval and ground engagements alike. On the ground, the American Marines leveraged the mobility and firepower of the M3 Stort light tanks, which, though modest by later war standards, were exceptionally suited to the jungle terrain and the narrow coastal approaches of Guadalcanal. Their ability to traverse muddy trails, breach small fortifications, and provide direct support to advancing infantry proved invaluable during the initial landings and subsequent counterattacks. Equally vital were the landing craft that enabled the projection of these forces from ship to shore. The landing craft infantry LLC and the versatile landing vehicle track Delft, nicknamed the Alligator, carried not only troops but also supplies, artillery, and even light vehicles directly onto the beaches under fire, allowing the Americans to establish and sustain their precarious foothold amid the chaos of combat. The M1 Garand rifle, issued to every infantryman, offered a significant advantage in rate of fire over the traditional bolt-action rifles commonly fielded by most other armies. granting the Marines an edge in close-quarters engagements through the dense undergrowth and narrow trails of the jungle. Japanese forces, meanwhile, demonstrated their own resourcefulness and discipline, relying on a combination of tried and true infantry weapons, light artillery, and the formidable Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters that dominated the early Pacific skies. Their Type 99 rifles, complemented by the Type 92 battalion guns and 37mm anti-tank weapons, allowed them to mount aggressive offensives and defend their positions with remarkable tenacity. The Zero, with its exceptional range and maneuverability, enabled Japanese pilots to strike deep into Allied-held territory, harass shipping lanes, and support ground operations with strafing runs and bombing attacks. Though the Japanese lacked some of the heavier armor and logistical support of the Americans, their forces were highly motivated, experienced in jungle combat, and trained to exploit terrain and concealment, often moving silently through dense foliage to stage surprise attacks or reinforce isolated positions under the cover of darkness. The interplay between these two military systems created a dynamic battlefield in which technology, tactics, and human ingenuity intertwined. American tanks and landing craft enabled rapid deployment and mobility, allowing forces to exploit weak points and fortify strategic positions, while aircraft provided a protective umbrella and struck critical targets, amplifying the effectiveness of ground operations. Meanwhile, Japanese emphasis on stealth, surprise, and precise marksmanship forced the Marines to adapt continuously, improving patrol techniques, setting ambushes of their own, and coordinating defensive fire with artillery and aircraft support. Each side learned from the other, adapting weapons and tactics to the environment. The enemy, and the unforgiving realities of prolonged jungle warfare. The limitations and strengths of each force's equipment also shaped the nature of their engagements. While American tanks could not match the firepower of heavier Japanese artillery in prolonged duels, their speed and mobility allowed them to respond quickly to threats along multiple fronts. Similarly, the Lufts could navigate swampy areas and shallow beaches that would have immobilized conventional vehicles, demonstrating how specialized equipment could decisively affect operational capability. The Garand rifles, with their semi-automatic design, gave the Marines sustained firepower during sudden enemy assaults, providing a critical buffer against numerically superior Japanese infantry in the close confines of the jungle. In contrast, Japanese light artillery and infantry weapons, though lacking the raw punch of American ordnance, were employed with precision and discipline, often devastating isolated positions or creating the conditions for a fierce infantry charge, particularly when supported by the psychological shock of coordinated zero-air attacks. Equally important was the logistical dimension. Maintaining and supplying these diverse systems required ingenuity and coordination. American forces had to ensure that tanks, landing craft, and aircraft were operational under extreme conditions, contending with corrosion from salt water, tropical storms, and the constant threat of Japanese interdiction. Ammunition, fuel, and spare parts had to flow steadily from distant bases, a task complicated by the persistent presence of enemy aircraft and naval forces. Japanese troops, operating closer to their own bases yet cut off periodically by Allied sea and air power, had to manage shortages with improvisation, relying on the Tokyo Express night runs to bring reinforcements, supplies, and equipment to embattled units. The contrast between the two sides highlighted not only differences in material capability, but also the ingenuity and resourcefulness required to sustain combat effectiveness in one of the most challenging theaters of World War II. The combination of innovative American technology and Japanese adaptability produced a camp characterized by relentless engagement across multiple domains, where every firefight, artillery exchange, and aerial encounter tested the limits of both human and mechanical endurance. Guadalcanal became a proving ground for the application of modern combined arms doctrine, showing how the effective integration of aircraft, armor, infantry, and naval support could shape the outcome of a campaign, even in terrain as hostile as a tropical island dense with jungle and riddled with hidden threats. The battle underscored the importance of technological innovation, tactical flexibility, and the interplay between equipment and human skill, and it illuminated how mastery of these elements often determined the difference between survival and annihilation. Ultimately, the use of aircraft, tanks, landing craft, and modern rifles by the Americans balanced against the disciplined infantry, light artillery, and Zero fighters of the Japanese, defined the character of the Guadalcanal campaign and contributed to its historical significance. It was not merely the number of weapons or their destructive power that decided engagements, but the manner in which commanders and soldiers wielded these tools in coordination, adapting to the environment, exploiting the enemy's weaknesses, and persevering through a battle that was as much about ingenuity and endurance as it was about courage. In this crucible of fire and foliage, technology and human will were inseparable, each magnifying the impact of the other and setting the stage for the hard-fought victories that would eventually secure Allied control of the island. By December 1942, the island of Guadalcanal had become a crucible of endurance, strategy, and sheer human determination, where the course of the Pacific War was being forged not in the rapid conquests of territory, but in the slow, painful accumulation of small victories and stubborn defense. The American forces, having landed on Red Beach and Tulagi months earlier, had endured a campaign defined by constant danger, unrelenting environmental hardships, and the ever-present threat of a determined enemy intent on reclaiming the island and its strategically vital airfield. Henderson Field, perched in the heart of the island's northern coast, had become the focal point of this struggle, its control critical to securing the lines of communication and supply between the United States, Australia, and New Zealand. The Marines, initially a largely inexperienced force, had been transformed through fire and trial into a seasoned unit capable of meeting the Japanese in combat on equal terms, their resolve tested daily by the twin pressures of enemy action and the harshness of the tropical environment. From the moment the Japanese realized the Americans had seized the airfield, a relentless campaign to retake it was launched, combining both infantry assaults and naval maneuvers in an effort to dislodge the defenders. The so-called Tokyo Express runs became a nightly gamble, with fast-moving destroyers ferrying troops and supplies under the cover of darkness, attempting to bring overwhelming force to the island's beleaguered defenders. The Americans, for their part, had to adapt quickly to this rhythm, coordinating artillery, small arms, and aircraft strikes to intercept the incoming Japanese forces while conserving their own limited ammunition and resources. Every successful interception meant fewer men and less equipment reaching the enemy, gradually tipping the balance in favor of the defenders and making each victory, however small, feel like a monumental achievement. The dense jungles and uneven terrain of Guadalcanal compounded the difficulties for both sides. The Marines were often forced to patrol and hold positions in areas where movement was painstakingly slow, and the risk of ambush was constant. Supply lines, though improved by the establishment of Henderson Field, remained precarious, as weather and Japanese interdiction threatened to cut off reinforcements and provisions. Despite these challenges, the defenders learned to use the environment to their advantage, establishing well-concealed positions, employing natural choke points, and creating overlapping fields of fire that could break up enemy attacks before they reached critical areas. The courage and initiative of individual soldiers became decisive, with small units holding against numerically superior forces through coordinated action. Disciplined fire and an unyielding commitment to the mission. Aerial combat continued to play a crucial role in the defense of the island. Pilots from Henderson Field flew daily missions to protect the airstrip, escort supply convoys, and attack Japanese positions, often facing the formidable Zero fighters that dominated the early months of the Pacific War. The interplay between air and ground forces became a hallmark of the Guadalcanal campaign, with the successes and failures of one side influencing the operations of the other in real time. The Americans' ability to maintain a functioning airfield, even under repeated attack, allowed them to project power beyond their immediate positions. Intercept reinforcements and provide crucial support to embattled units on the ground, gradually eroding the Japanese capacity to mount sustained offensives. Naval engagements continued to shape the campaign as well. The waters surrounding Guadalcanal were the site of numerous night battles, bombardments, and skirmishes in which both sides sought to disrupt the opponent's logistical lifelines. Every engagement carried high stakes. The loss of a single transport ship could delay reinforcements for days, while the destruction of an enemy vessel could prevent an assault before it began. The Americans, learning from early setbacks, improved coordination between naval gunfire, aircraft cover, and ground observation, enabling them to contest Japanese operations at sea more effectively as the campaign progressed. This careful orchestration of combined arms made it increasingly difficult for the Japanese to gain a foothold, forcing them into costly and often unsuccessful attacks that depleted both men and material. As the months wore on, the human cost of the campaign became starkly apparent. Casualties on both sides were heavy, with soldiers succumbing not only to enemy fire but also to disease, malnutrition, and exhaustion. Tropical fevers, dysentery, and malaria claimed their share of lives, compounding the attrition caused by combat and challenging commanders to maintain morale and combat effectiveness. Despite these hardships, the American forces' cohesion and determination remained steadfast. Their resilience under fire a testament to rigorous training, leadership, and a growing familiarity with the unforgiving environment. Every day the Marines held their positions. They solidified their control over the island, denying the Japanese a strategic base and gradually wearing down their capacity to contest the territory. The culmination of these efforts was the securing of Guadalcanal by December 1942. Henderson Field, once a partially constructed Japanese airstrip, had become a symbol of American persistence and strategic foresight. Its runways now busy with aircraft supporting the ongoing defense and projecting power throughout the region. The success of the campaign marked the first time Japanese expansion had been decisively halted in the Pacific, providing a crucial turning point that boosted Allied confidence and set the stage for subsequent offensives across the theater. The combination of disciplined infantry, coordinated artillery, effective use of air power, and innovative logistical support demonstrated how multifaceted warfare could be integrated to achieve strategic objectives even under extreme conditions. The lessons of Guadalcanal extended beyond immediate military considerations. They underscored the importance of preparation, adaptability, and the relentless will to endure in the face of adversity. Commanders and soldiers alike learned to anticipate and respond to unexpected challenges, whether in the form of environmental hazards, supply shortages, or the ingenuity of an enemy determined to reclaim lost ground. The campaign highlighted the critical value of integrated operations, where success depended on the seamless coordination of land, sea, and air forces, each amplifying the effectiveness of the others. In the end, the steadfast defense of Henderson Field and the eventual securing of Guadalcanal stood as a testament not only to tactical and technological ingenuity, but also to the courage, resilience, and determination of the men who fought, bled, and endured through one of the most grueling campaigns of the Second World War, shaping the course of the Pacific conflict in ways that would resonate for years to come. As the dust settled over the dense jungles and rocky coastlines of Guadalcanal, the significance of what had been achieved began to crystallize for both the soldiers who fought and the broader strategic planners guiding the war effort. This island, little known to most before 1942, had become a proving ground for courage, ingenuity, and the enduring human spirit in the face of almost unimaginable adversity. The campaign had not been won in a single dramatic strike or decisive battle, but rather through a series of relentless actions, painstaking defensive measures, and the constant push of troops, supplies, and aircraft to hold and expand the American foothold. By halting Japanese expansion for the first time in the Pacific, Guadalcanal reshaped the strategic landscape, giving the Allies not only a vital airfield and staging area, but also the psychological edge that comes from proving that the seemingly unstoppable momentum of an enemy could indeed be checked. The victory was hard-won and came at great cost. Marines endured diseases such as malaria and dysentery, fought in oppressive heat and humidity, and faced a determined, well-trained Japanese adversary who employed both traditional infantry assaults and innovative Tokyo Express night resupply operations to try to reclaim the island. Despite these challenges, the Americans held firm, leveraging a combination of tactical ingenuity, coordinated artillery, air cover, and naval support. The integration of air and ground forces, Wildcat and Dauntless aircraft protecting landing craft and engaging enemy planes, tanks supporting infantry in the thick jungle, and landing vehicles delivering essential supplies under fire demonstrated a new model of modern warfare where combined arms operations could decisively shape the outcome of a campaign. Every small success, every repelled assault, contributed to the larger achievement of establishing control over Guadalcanal, a foothold that would prove essential for the months and years to come. The human dimension of the campaign was as vital as the technological and tactical factors. Leadership, initiative, and courage on the part of individuals and small units often determined whether positions were held or lost. General Alexander Vandergrift's leadership, for example, turned a largely inexperienced Marine division into a battle-hardened force capable of meeting repeated Japanese offensives with resilience and strategic acumen. The ability of soldiers to adapt to harsh conditions, to coordinate with supporting fire, and to maintain morale under constant threat became the invisible force that tipped the scales in favor of the defenders. It was a testament to the enduring importance of human courage, training, and ingenuity, showing that even the most sophisticated weapons systems are only as effective as the people who wield them. From a broader perspective, the Guadalcanal campaign sent a message to both the Allies and the Japanese. For the Allies, it demonstrated that Japanese forces, although formidable and experienced, were not invincible. Success on Guadalcanal proved that carefully planned and executed operations could disrupt Japanese expansion, safeguard critical supply routes, and set the stage for future offensives across the Pacific theater. For Japan, the campaign was a sobering reminder that overextension and logistical challenges could be exploited, and that even their most disciplined troops could be checked when faced with determined and adaptive opposition. The lessons learned on Guadalcanal about coordination between land, sea, and air forces, about supply chain resilience, and about the necessity of flexible leadership would echo throughout subsequent campaigns. From the Solomon Islands to New Guinea and beyond, the capture and defense of Henderson Field was the linchpin of the Allied success. Once operational, the airfield allowed American aircraft to project power across the surrounding waters, defend shipping lanes, and interdict Japanese reinforcements, making it increasingly difficult for the enemy to challenge Allied control. The synergy between air power, naval operations, and ground defense demonstrated a modern model of warfare, one where success depended not merely on the number of troops or weapons, but on how effectively those assets were coordinated to achieve strategic objectives. The victory at Guadalcanal thus became a blueprint for future amphibious and joint operations, emphasizing preparation, adaptability, and the integration of multiple combat elements into a coherent fighting force. Equally important was the symbolic weight of the victory. Guadalcanal became a touchstone for Allied morale, a story of resilience and triumph that illustrated the potential of well-led, motivated forces to overcome adversity. Every soldier who endured the jungles, every pilot who fought through dangerous skies, and every sailor who risked nights at sea contributed to a narrative that was about more than just territory. It was about proving that the Allies could challenge and overcome a seemingly unstoppable adversary, that strategic planning, combined with courage and perseverance, could produce tangible results in the most inhospitable conditions. As the island was secured by December 1942, Guadalcanal emerged not only as a military victory, but as a foundational moment in the Pacific War. It was the first major offensive success that halted Japanese expansion, secured vital supply lines, and provided the Allies with the momentum to plan and execute further operations across the Pacific. Its lessons in leadership, adaptability, coordination, and human endurance would resonate throughout the war and serve as a reminder of what can be accomplished when courage, preparation, and resolve converge in the face of overwhelming challenges. Thank you so much for watching and joining us on this journey through one of World War II's most pivotal campaigns. If you found this story engaging and insightful, please give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any future episodes that bring history to life. Your support helps us continue to create content that explores these remarkable moments from the past. And now, as the day comes to a close, we wish you a peaceful night and sweet dreams. Good night, and we will see you in the next story.